Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sam Whelan. I am the manager of power supply for Holy Cross Energy, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the DER programs that Holy Cross has implemented recently, and just share the approach we've taken, some of the highlights of the programs that have worked well, and just give you a little insight into how we're trying to plug and play and adapt into the future. So first, Holy Cross Energy, we serve about 44,000 members in Western Colorado. We serve from Vail up to Aspen, and then west on Interstate 70 as well. We're a pretty heavy winter peaking utility, largely due to the ski resorts in our area and the tourism that brings in. And we've got, we're kind of unique in terms of distribution co-ops. We own some generation, transmission, and have quite a bit of flexibility in our energy portfolio as well. Our goals call for 100% renewable energy by 2030. Our board recently issued that goal. We're making good progress towards that. And we're really looking at everything from the bulk scale, transmission connected resources, to what can we do on the wholesale market and through wholesale activities. Also, we've got quite a bit of development on utility scale distributed resources. But I'll talk to you mainly about our retail programs today, how we look at like member facing DER programs and how those interplay with our portfolio as a whole. We're interested in DER programs for a variety of reasons. The number one reason, though, I'd say is related to capacity costs. That really is just a need for peak reduction, and how can we reduce our peak load when times that energy is the most expensive, and save on our capacity related costs that are passed through from our wholesale provider. That's probably like 85 to 90% of the value proposition right now that we have for retail distributed programs. The other aspect, as we move towards 100% renewables, the aspect that is increasingly important to us is related to renewable oversupply. And we're really looking at, what are our options to mitigate oversupply. You can see this 2023 production profile here, where we have times when, essentially midday when there's excess wind and excess solar. And our load is generally low for our utility in the summer months when we have the most solar. So that's something that we're working on. How do we manage that into the future? We've got a variety of different options, but we're looking at having retail programs play a role in that as well. So we've taken a few approaches towards developing DER programs for our members. One, I think when we talk to people around the industry, I think there's a lot of like back and forth on what's the best approach. So you'll get, people on the far side that say like you need as granular pricing as possible. It's all about, marginal pricing at a 15-minute basis, and that's what people need to make a change. Then you have on the other side, essentially everyone should have like more of a subscription type bill, and it should be very simple. I think the approach that we've taken is a little bit of both, not quite on the extreme of either side, but offering something that's similar, because we have a variety of different members that have different needs. So this first approach is having the member have the option to control. So this is essentially, we look at it as our duty to make sure that we can pass through the economics. If the member is able to help save Holy Cross money, they should also be able to save money. And we do this through dynamic rates. I think, we've got a lot of actually residential participants in this type of program as well. But especially like on the large commercial side, when there's customers that have like operations facilities, they have the ability to manage their load. Generally what we've seen is they don't want us holding the keys to that and having control over DERs. They want to just know, what's the price signal, what's the time period, and then they'll do their best to help save money, but ultimately keep the control to themselves. The second option that we have is if Holy Cross holds the option to control. Obviously, if we have control, the economics are a little more favorable to the member because our risk is covered, so we don't have to discount our rates and incentives quite so much. And the approach we've taken here is making sure that we can develop fixed bill credits for the member. That, for example, if we can control an EV charger, then that's worth X dollars a month to Holy Cross, and so we'll pass through a bill credit to the member. That's the simplest option. The member doesn't have to do anything. They really just say, all right, if I get an incentive, I'm willing for Holy Cross to control my DER. The third aspect that kind of interplays with this is covering the installation costs for DERs. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that we've seen. Putting in a $20,000 piece of equipment can be pretty daunting for many homeowners, especially on the residential side. So how do we make sure, if there's a value proposition to the utility for 10 years, then how do we make the costs of that equipment kind of reflective of that 10-year value proposition as well? So we have what we call a service agreement, and that's essentially like an on-bill financing mechanism where we pay the vendor or installer upfront, and the member pays us back over time on their bill. Generally, these are zero interest funds, and I'd say the typical, depending on the equipment and warranties and stuff, typically that the costs get paid back between 3 and 10 years. So diving into a little more detail, on the member option to control, our most popular dynamic rate is what we call our peak time payback program. This is a behavioral demand response program. There's no penalty for not performing well. It's a really low risk option, and we get great response from our members on this. Essentially, we calculate a historical baseline of each member, and then the day before we anticipate a peak event, we'll send out a notification, text or email, and we'll say, if tomorrow from 5 to 7 p.m., for example, is a high event, we'll pay them 50 cents per kilowatt hour, based on the amount they reduce. So their actual metered usage below the baseline historically. And then if it's a critical event, we pay $1 a kilowatt hour for their reduction, which is pretty generous. And I think we've seen some good response on those types of rates. We've got about 1,900 members enrolled, not a whole lot of marketing either. So, we've just had some good word of mouth. Typically, I'd say that aggregate reduction is about 20%, but we've got some large commercial members that can reduce 60 to 80% during those peak windows that we call. The peak windows are usually like 2 to 4 times a month for about 2 hours in duration. We've got about 2 megawatts of peak response, and then one of the interesting things is we get, even during heat waves, like in the summer, if you have 4 days in a row that are all, pretty high load days, we get pretty consistent response even if we have to call multiple in a row. We try to be more narrow just to help with response, but we're pretty happy with how our members are doing. And then the last thing I'd say, generally we save $2 for every $1 that we spend on this program. So it's a great win-win program. We're paying our members and providing incentives to them to help us out. And that extra dollar helps cover our risk that maybe we miss the peak and don't achieve any savings. Or, there can always be baseline error. So we're pretty happy with that split there and being able to provide savings to all of our members. A new behavioral demand response rate that we piloted last year. This will become more important as we increase the renewables in our portfolio. Essentially, it's the inverse of our peak time payback program, and we pay for energy usage above the baseline. So you can envision right here, this is actually load. It looks like an inverted solar production curve, but it's actually load. And we called an event and said, we have excess renewables from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we will pay, I think that one was maybe like 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a little more variable of a rate. And this was what our pilot participants were able to do, which you can see is pretty considerable. And the ability to match load with supply was exciting, albeit it's a pilot and relatively small, but something we're excited about and hope to expand. Then on the second option, where Holy Cross has control over the DERs, I'll share kind of our approach. We started years ago with our EV program. We've got over 1 megawatt of controllable load. On the level 2 charging, we provide free home chargers to our members. And in return, they agree to allow us to control their EV chargers, largely just to curtail it during our peak events. And we've seen some good response with that one. We've got also significant growth in transit and DC fast charging in our area as well. That's been fun to see out of that program. The next step we took was a Basalt Vista pilot project, and we partnered with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, DOE, multiple other local partners, and essentially helped with an affordable housing unit for teachers in our area at a high school. And provided equipment. So, essentially it became all electric housing community. We had control through a local controller that talked to all of these different DERs out on the right side of your screen. So we had battery storage, heat pump water heaters, electric vehicles, thermostats for HVAC load, and could talk to the inverters on the distributed PV. And the controller essentially allowed us to provide set points and have a specific response from each of those houses. After that, we developed, we basically said, okay, we proved it out that this is possible. We can control these DERs. Now, how do we get this at scale? That was obviously a heavily subsidized pilot project in order to get it up and running. And so we developed our distribution flexibility tariff, which is a fixed bill credit for control. And then our DER service agreement, that's the financing mechanism I talked about before. And then the fifth main step that we've gone through is working with Camu Energy. They are a cloud-based software company that provides integration of like our market operations, our forecasting, on the large scale for all of our energy purchases, insight into DER capabilities across our system, and then dispatching control of DERs. So through that platform, we've kind of phased out of this local controller concept and gone more of a, having an aggregator, talk to each of the specific devices in the back end. That seemed a little more cost effective to us. And then really the last thing that, when we put all of that together, the most recent program that we developed is what we call our Power Plus program. And this is a combination of all of those tariffs and programs I mentioned above, and allows for us to control residential storage, particularly right now, the Tesla Powerwall 2s. So I'll just give an example of how it works. Essentially, let's just say it's a $20,000 installation for a couple of Powerwalls. We work with the installer and have some preferred local installers. We pay them directly for the installation of the equipment, and then the member agrees to repay that over time through our DER service agreement. So let's say $160 a month financing charge for the storage, and then we forecast the amount of money that we think we're going to save and pass that through our distribution flexibility tariff, which is a bill credit. And that bill credit offsets the financing charge. So the bill credit, let's call it $130 a month credit, and it's $160 a month financing charge. So in net, we're able to get to, roughly we're hoping across the whole program about a $30 a month premium for the member to be able to put in battery storage, which in our opinion, $30 a month for $20,000, that's a pretty good deal. I think it's a good example of, what we're working on and how we're trying to, be able to make, help DERs kind of scale, get out there on our system. We're utilizing them no different than we would a bulk scale asset. And it's I'd say the storage is playing into both helping on peak reduction capability, as well as mitigating renewable oversupply, as we can charge those in the overnight hours or during the daytime solar. So anyways, that's kind of the latest program that we have. I think we're really excited about it. And I think we're excited about the construct just in general. The Power Plus program is the first one where we've really taken everything and put it together. But it's a good, I think for us, it works well in terms of being a plug and play for multiple DERs. You can envision the other battery manufacturers or other DERs having, this can be a part of thermostat programs, heat pump water heaters, or, you think about heat pumps coming in the future, a little more difficult in our area. They're very expensive and we're in a cold climate, but there are some options out there. But I think just this construct of providing financing and providing ongoing credits that pass through the economic value to the member is something that we're excited about, and we've gotten good feedback on. All right, well, that's the main slides that I have. Wanted to leave some time for questions and answers. Debbie, I'll pass it back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. Thanks for that overview of what Holy Cross Energy is doing. Holy Cross, it's a small utility, but you guys are so innovative in terms of how you're integrating and continually adding on different types of DERs into your mix and using them to save people money at the end of the day. So if there are any questions for Sam, I'm just sort of trying to look at the chat and I'm not seeing any at the moment. I'll just ask real quick about that battery program you mentioned. Will you reserve some of that capacity for the homeowner in case there is a power outage or resilience problem? How do you determine that balance between what the customer might want and what you might want?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that we've been asked a variety of times. As a part of our standard program offering, we always leave 20% in the tank, if you will. So the member always has, I'd say based on the typical like load analysis that we've done, they've got about 4 hours of ride through with that 20% left in the tank. So that's about as bad as it gets. But in general, I'd say we're exercising, we're dispatching the storage about as often as our behavioral demand response. So we're talking 2 to 4 times a month for 2 hours. So, the hours that we're dispatching are relatively minimal. So for the most part, they have access to the full storage for resilience. But that's something to consider in the value proposition. If the member wanted more, and it's something that we want to think through, how do we develop this? It gets a little more complicated on the technical side, as you could have, everyone wants something different, and right now it's simpler to roll something out as a standard offering. But if you think about the $30 a month when we have full control with 20% left, if the member wanted more, then maybe it's $70 a month. But we haven't done any kind of market testing on the elasticity of that and how important resilience is to members. The only thing I'd say is we already have members installing battery systems in their homes at the full cost, not a part of the program. So it'll be something I think we're excited to learn about over time.
Okay. There's another question. Do you have DER programs that don't involve utility direct control, for example, pricing? So you did mention the critical peak pricing and the dynamic renewable pricing, but
yeah, we have some time of use pricing that's pretty standard, just 4-hour blocks every evening essentially are at a higher pricing. We did a rate study with the Brattle Group years ago. And implemented that time of use rate. That it was a 4-to-1 on peak to off peak ratio. So pretty high, in terms of industry standards. that really provides a signal. We just don't have a lot of uptake on that that rate though. We've had a time of use rate for a long time, and I mean I'm talking handfuls of members that are interested in that. So that's why we worked pretty hard to roll out the peak time payback rate, because not everyone wants to pay higher prices every single day for 4 hours in the evening, and that's also not exactly how our costs work. So that's why we developed the peak time payback program, because it's just a much narrower window, just a couple times a month. It's like, hey, go out to dinner because we've got a peak tonight, and they come back and get a bill credit as well. So that's our biggest one. And then on the dynamic rate for DERs, beyond that was the renewable oversupply rate I talked about. I didn't talk much about what that rate is. It's not as simple as the peak time payback where I can say it's $1 a kilowatt hour for critical, because the rate could vary based on wholesale market conditions, or what are we trying to optimize for during the renewable oversupply. What's the next unit that may get curtailed, and what are the economics for that curtailment. So generally we're saying around 4 cents a kilowatt hour is probably a good expectation for a discount if you use more. But when you consider our large commercial members, their variable rates, I want to say about 6 cents right now. So you're getting close to having free energy during oversupply events for our large commercial members. So it's still a good deal.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Sam.